Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
This is part 17 of Wolves and Reindeer, Siberia, Arctic. Across the frozen tundra of the extreme northern part of Russia, the reindeer make their annual migration from their summer pastures far above the Arctic Circle across the Yamal Peninsula to the winter pastures in the taiga of the Russian mainland. In the Nenets language, Yamal means edge of the world. They live in conditions most of us cannot imagine. They set up camp in landscapes covered in permafrost and traveling through freezing temperatures to move their herds. They are a nomadic people, living as their ancestors have done for hundreds of years, herding their vast reindeer herds. The Nenets live in a conical reindeer hide tents called chums. Their clothing is made from reindeer hides, sewn with reindeer sinews. Lassos and ropes are made from reindeer rawhide, and the sledges are made by hand entirely out of wood, with no metal or no nails used at all. They are pulled by reindeer across the frozen ground. The Nenets use every part of the reindeer, from eating their meat, drinking their blood, and using their bones to make tools. Amid a herd of thousands, each reindeer is instantly recognizable to even the youngest of the Nenets. Each person has its own sacred reindeer which must not be killed until it is too old to walk, at which time they find another similar-looking one to take its place. Wolves are a natural predator of the reindeer, and the Russian government pays a high bounty for wolf skins. To protect their herd and their livelihood, Nenet men trap and hunt the wolves that stalk their reindeer livestock. But even so, hundreds of reindeer are killed by wolves every year. Usko's tribe knew of his ability to transform from man to wolf, and therefore he was protected when he was in their midst. But they often met up with herders from other tribes who would have quickly taken his life. Usko learned from a very young age to not get caught in his wolf body when away from his own people. He explained this to Rebecca and Catherine. He was worried that Spencer hadn't yet transformed into his human form and wouldn't be safe traveling with them. Rebecca encouraged Spencer to try, but he just didn't seem to have the ability to do it. It seemed that the serum had affected him so thoroughly that he no longer had the ability to transform. He seemed to be losing some of his mental capacity as well. In the wild, a wolf's blood is concentrated in its muscles and vital organs, so it can complete its instinctual task of hunting and killing prey. This means the part of their brain that assesses risks and rewards, decision-making as it were, is lower priority and is not in control. There is no logic, no reasoning, only instinct and muscle control. And the body generates hormones like adrenaline to give its extra strength, endurance, and sensory function. While in human form and before the serum had been administered, Spencer was trained to be an athlete. He was a football player, strong and aggressive. Apparently, the serum had perfected that part of him that was feral and athletic. He may never be able to transform back into his human form. And if he stayed in his wolf body, he would rapidly forget what it was like to be human. In the wild, he would become a hunter, a werewolf capable of killing anyone who came across his path. But confined in a domestic home situation, he would become a wolf dog, trainable, affectionate, and somewhat predictable, especially when offered treats. It hurt Rebecca to leave her brother behind, but they agreed that he would be safer if he stayed with Utan's family. The little girls were thrilled, and Spencer appeared to be very happy with the decision. All he really cared about was being fed and loved. He'd get plenty of both if he stayed behind. Usko, Catherine, and Rebecca said their goodbyes and drove away in a rented car. Utan's wife had packed enough soup and sandwiches to last the long trip to the Yamal Peninsula. beyond the Arctic Circle, where Usko's family would be able to hide and protect them until they could cross the border into Finland. It was snowing heavily, covering the tracks that led through the forest. Jack wasn't sure he was following the right course back to the location Sasha had planned to meet him. The terrain all looked the same. The previous day, when he'd been running toward the rock outcropping which led to the hidden entrance to the underground cave, it had been easy to navigate. The rocks loomed ahead, and even though the snow and the dense forest, he was able to keep his sights on the rocks. But now, running through the trees with the rocks at his back, he wasn't sure he was following the same direction. He stopped and he looked behind him. Luther was struggling to keep up with Jack. He was new to this, being in a wolf's body, and he didn't have the strength of the younger wolf. He lagged behind, and Jack had to stop and let him catch up several times. He figured it was early afternoon by now, but the heavy snow and the cloud cover made it difficult to discern which direction they were heading or what time of day it actually was. He knew they'd been running for hours. He had a cell phone in his pack that was awkwardly strapped to his back, but he'd have to assume human form to use it. There wouldn't be any reception anyway. The snowfall was intensifying with every passing moment. He surveyed the featureless expanse around him and realized he was lost. He felt a surge of panic settling in. Someone would have discovered that Luther was missing by now, along with Catherine and the other two, and the assistant. They'd be looking for him. They had to keep running. Sasha sat in the car, growing more worried as the minutes ticked past. He should be here by now. She kept glancing at the rearview mirror, afraid that someone would see her car parked on the turnout to the logging road. She wasn't far off the highway. It was snowing heavily, and if he didn't show up soon, she might not be able to get the car out. She didn't want to risk moving it closer to the highway, though. A passing motorist or even a snowplow would see a woman stopped on the side of the road in the snow, and they'd want to help. They'd want to assist and send her on her way. She didn't want to have to explain that she was waiting for someone. "Damn it, Jack, where are you?" She slapped the steering wheel in her frustration and turned the motor on again to run the heater. Her car was good in the snow. It was a four-wheel drive with good snow tires, but she didn't have any food or water or blankets in the car in case she wasn't able to get out. She was angry with herself for not thinking of that. She tried her cell phone again, but there was no reception. As the hours passed by, she became panicked. She couldn't leave. What would he do if she wasn't here to meet him? But she couldn't stay in this cold car all night running the motor to keep the heat going either. Eventually, she'd have to dig her car out to reach the road. She hadn't planned for that either, she thought to herself. No shovel, no food, no blankets, and no sign of the snow letting up anytime soon. Luther was having trouble keeping up. He was at that point of exhaustion, but if he stopped, he would surely freeze to death. Jack was struggling with the decision to keep going and leave Luther behind, or to slow down and find a place to shelter where they could rest and be safe. He didn't have time to ponder the decision. In the distance, he picked up a slight buzzing sound and realized it was the sound of snowmobiles. His acute hearing was able to discern that they were still a good distance away, but were heading straight for him. In the way that wolves can speak to each other through their thoughts, he alerted Luther to run. The snow had tapered off just a bit, so Jack knew the snowmobiles would be able to pick up their tracks. It could be hunters, but most likely it was soldiers from the military base that housed the laboratory they'd escaped from. Either way, it wasn't good. Knowing they were lost was not helpful either. He could tell that they were still heading down the mountain, so he hoped he would eventually run into a paved road, and then perhaps he could get his bearings, or cell reception at least. Sasha realized she had dozed off with the car running. It was toasty warm, and she'd been dreaming of her childhood in Russia. In her dream, her parents were still alive, and she and her brother were sitting around a Christmas tree opening presents. Her mother was an artist and had painted a beautiful set of Matryoshka dolls, each perfectly carved to fit inside each larger successive one. The largest was nearly 10 inches tall, and when opened, it revealed the next nesting doll, which in turn opened to another and another. The smallest was barely 2 inches tall. She loved these dolls and still displayed them every Christmas. In her dream, her brother was opening his present. It was a large box, and when all the paper wrapping had come off, inside was a little wolf puppy. It jumped out of the box and began licking him in the face. Her brother was laughing, and Mom and Dad were smiling. Suddenly she heard planes overhead, and soldiers were at their door, and someone was pointing guns at her, and they were going to shoot the wolf. She woke with a gasp. She turned off the engine and listened. She thought she could hear a sound coming from the forest. Snowmobiles, she thought with a panic. She jumped out of the car and brushed the snow from her windshield and surveyed the snow that had drifted up against her car. It was deep, but she thought she could plow through it without too much effort. She jumped back in, turned on the engine, made sure the car was in four-wheel drive. It might be nothing, she told herself, but the sense of dread she felt in hearing that sound was not to be ignored. Once Catherine's body had enough nourishment to begin functioning again, she became more mentally coherent as well. She was sitting in the passenger seat of the car while Usko drove. I need to call my brother. Where exactly am I? Usko filled her in on what he knew had happened, and Rebecca filled in the rest. The last thing I remember, I was sitting in a pickup at Miguel's ranch. My brother told me to stay in the truck. There was something going on. Then I remember seeing a face in the window, and then I don't remember anything else until waking up and seeing that doctor looming over me with the needle. Then I was gone again. Then I remember seeing your face, Usko, when you got me out of there. I really can't remember anything else. You were drugged, Catherine, Rebecca said. The professor and my brother and I were actually coming to find you and Jack in Mexico. These men pointed guns at us and shot us with some kind of tranquilizer or something. That's all I remember. Next thing I know, I'm chained up in a cage in the laboratory. They had you on the gurney, and Spence and I were in cages. Professor was taking loads of blood from you, Catherine, test tubes full, and Spence and I were just kept in the cages. I know he needed your blood to make his serum that he was selling to the Russians, but I don't really know what he wanted to do with my brother and I. I guess our blood wasn't good enough. Jack probably thinks I'm still somewhere in Mexico, Catherine explained. She tried his cell phone number again. He's not picking up. His voicemail is full. I don't know what's happened to him. He might be dead for all I know. Catherine started to cry. Usko reached over and held her hand and gave her a soft smile. We'll figure this all out, he said. Right now, we've got to get you to safety. And that means out of this country. You were nearly dead. The doctor had already taken almost 4 liters of your blood. He literally intended to drain you of all of your blood. Catherine, we need to get you strong again, and we need to get you away from these lunatics. She squeezed his hand and smiled at him. Thank you, she whispered. Luther was running as fast as his wolf legs could go, but he was completely exhausted. He stumbled and fell several times and could not keep up with Jack. Jack continued to circle around for him, encouraging him not to give up. The snowmobiles were gaining on them. A normal wolf can hear as far as 6 miles away in the forest and as far as 10 miles away in the open. But it appears that werewolves can possibly pick up certain sounds even farther than a normal wolf. So Jack assumed the snowmobiles were still a good 10 miles or more away from them when they first picked up the sound. Now it sounded as if they were less than a mile and gaining fast. Even keeping to the tree line, it would be easy for the men to follow their tracks. The snow was barely falling now. From a nearby ridge, Jack could see clearings of trees far to the left that appeared to be a straight cut through the trees. It looked like it might be a road. Veering left, they began running for the clearing. Jack heard a shot ring out and realized the men on snowmobiles had sighted them. Luther tried to pick up speed, but he was lagging considerably behind now. Jack stopped and turned just in time to see a snowmobile crest the ridge he had just been on. They were nearly on top of them. Run, he howled to Luther. Luther briefly looked behind him, a fatal error. He tripped in the snow and went down. Jack heard the rifle and saw Luther's body jump as the bullet hit him, then fall. Luther tried to raise himself, but another shot rang out, and he was hit again. Another bullet whistled past Jack's ear and hit a nearby tree. Jack fled as fast as his legs would carry him. The snowmobiles were now closing the expanse of what would normally be a meadow, heading straight for him. He raced through the trees ahead of him in the direction of the road. Occasionally a shot would ring out, but he was able to weave through the trees and avoid getting hit. He knew the road was near, but what then? Would there be enough snow on the road for the snowmobiles to cross? How much time would that buy him? Sasha could hear the snowmobiles getting closer. She had a gut feeling they were chasing Jack. She watched the trees, hoping to see him. If they weren't chasing Jack, if they were just soldiers from the base or hunters, she had her story prepared. She would say she was driving to her family's home for the holiday, had car trouble, and decided to pull off the road. She would tell them she had called a repair truck to come assist her and that she'd be just fine, thank you. Hopefully they wouldn't insist on fixing her car. And if they thought they'd take advantage of a woman alone on the side of the road, well, she had plenty of guns stashed in the car. She knew how to protect herself. She was thinking of all the scenarios that might occur when she saw a flash of fur in the trees coming towards her. She jumped out of the car and opened the back door. Jack burst through the trees and she yelled, "Jump in!" Slamming the door shut behind him, she jumped in and gunned it, forcing the vehicle through the snow. She had reached the road just as the first snowmobile burst through the trees. Jack lay in the back seat, panting and shaking uncontrollably. He didn't have the strength to change back into his human form, not yet. He closed his eyes and slept while Sasha sped up the highway. There would be roadblocks, she was sure of it, but she'd figure something out. She was good at that. And she was a woman. There'd be no one looking for her. And once Jack was back in his human form, no one would be looking for him either. They would appear to be just a lovely couple traveling to a ski lodge for the holiday. She did wonder about Jack's companion, the doctor. Alex, her brother's associate from the military base, had said there were two wolves, Jack and the doctor. But she had only seen one come through the trees. Oh well, she thought to herself, she had Jack, and that's all that mattered right now. She'd hear his story after he had a chance to rest. For now, the ski lodge sounded like a really great idea. It was Christmas Eve. They could cozy up in front of a fire, have a cup of hot buttered rum. She let out a big sigh of relief while Jack dozed in the back seat. Miguel had been trying to reach Jack for days. He'd been out to the Tarahumara village and let Julian and Juanita know what was going on with Catherine. Julian was very concerned, of course. He wanted to know if Jack needed any help. Miguel encouraged him to stay put until they heard from Jack. Both Julian and Juanita had returned to Miguel's ranch to wait for a call from Jack. It was Christmas Eve, and Miguel had brought Rosa home from the hospital a few days earlier. She was still a bit shaken up, but she would be just fine. She was in the kitchen preparing a large Mexican holiday dinner for everyone. It would be a bit somber without Jack and Catherine, but they would celebrate and eat the food Rosa prepared while anxiously waiting. Julian couldn't stop pacing. It was driving Miguel crazy. "You've got to do something, man. Get your mind off all the worrying," Miguel told Julian. They saddled up a couple of horses, put their axes and guns in the saddlebags, and headed out to cut down a Christmas tree while Juanita helped Rosa in the kitchen. There weren't a lot of trees to choose from in this Chihuahuan desert of Mexico that surrounded Miguel's ranch, but they'd find a palo verde or a mesquite and make do with that. "If nothing else, we'll just cut down one of the evergreens out of old Lopez's yard. They will pay him back for stealing my mule." Miguel's mule had become something of a legend around his hacienda and the neighboring ranches. No matter what kind of gate latch was used, the mule had a way of figuring out how it worked and freeing himself. He'd walk down the long driveway out onto the dirt road and over to the neighboring ranch owned by Old Man Lopez a mile up the road. The old guy would give the mule an apple and he'd trot back home again. This happened day after day. And then one day the mule decided not to bother walking back home. He just stayed there at Lopez's ranch, where he'd lived ever since. But the old man loved his evergreen trees. He proudly told everyone who'd listen how he had planted them over 50 years ago. "Surely one would be worth the price of my old mule," Miguel chuckled to himself. Rebecca was very excited. What better place to spend Christmas Eve than in the snowy, frozen Arctic with a herd of reindeer? She couldn't hold back her excitement. Usko beamed. You're going to love my family, Rebecca. You'll get to ride through the snow on a wooden sledge pulled by reindeer. You'll get used to the cold, and really, you don't hardly notice it in the reindeer clothing that everyone wears. It keeps you very warm. And once we're in Finland, the Sami reindeer herders will welcome us too. We're all family. You'll be safe there, and so will Catherine. And you'll get to see the northern lights dancing across the sky. Did you know they were caused by a magical fox running across the Arctic valley and sweeping its tail across the snow as he goes, leaving a trail of drifting sparks in his wake? In Finland, that is why they are called foxfires. He turned to Catherine. Don't worry. We'll get a hold of your brother. It will be a wonderful Christmas present to hear that his sister is safe. Sasha pulled into the ski lodge. Jack was still asleep in the back seat, so she threw her coat over him and went into the hotel lobby to book a condo room. It would be a nice place to spend the night. They had cozy restaurants and hundreds of people walking around in their ski coats and boots. It would be easy to assimilate into the crowd here. Before returning to the car, she pulled out her cell phone and called her brother. I have Jack. He's safe. No sign of the doctor, though. I don't know what happened. Jack's been sleeping and hasn't been able to tell me. Have you found out anything about who took Catherine and the other 2 Americans? And have you heard from the boss? There was a long pause while their brother spoke into the phone. Okay, Peter, thank you. We're going to stay here for the weekend. Tell Ninista everything is going as planned. We'll find Catherine. Let me know if you hear anything. And Peter, Merry Christmas. She hung up the phone and walked over to the car. She opened the back seat and ruffled Jack's ears, waking him from a deep sleep. Hey, Wolfman, time to wake up. It's Christmas Eve and we have some snuggling to do.